Hi, everybody. This is Kevin with Garrison Dental Solutions. You are in the right place here this evening if you are here for our quick start guide on sectional matrix systems. We have a lot of folks signed up for tonight, and a lot of people are logging in right now, even as we speak. So we're going to take care of a couple of housekeeping things here a minute before we get started to let everybody have the chance to log in. With me here tonight is Kendall. She is in the background. You won't see or hear her too much until we get to the question portion of this evening. If you have any technical issues, no sound, no video, or anything like that, go ahead and type that into the question bar. She is monitoring that and can help out with the technical stuff. And then when we get to the end, she'll moderate the questions as well. So we will reserve questions until the end. We usually will stick around as long as it takes to get through them all. So please be prolific in your question asking here this evening. So here I am. Again, my name is Kevin. Been here with the company for a long time. I was their third employee, and it's been a great career here at Garrison. I've enjoyed it very much, and I've got to do a lot of very different things throughout the years, and currently handling the continuing education program, coordinating that along with Kendall. And gives me an opportunity to talk to lots of folks around the world, and that's just a whole lot of fun. We'll have people on this evening from more than 50 different countries, which is pretty cool. If you have questions about anything related to the materials this evening, please use my email, my personal email address that's on your screen right now, and I will get back to you. If you have technique questions that you think of after the fact or something that doesn't get answered for you this evening, please feel free to hit me up on that email address. I want to let you know we've got something pretty fun coming up here in June on the 17th. It's a Friday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be doing a hands-on CE course with Dr. Jim Braun. He's helped us on a tremendous number of courses throughout the years, and he has a great program where you actually get all the materials on your screen, plus I believe 3M is co-sponsoring this event, so you'll get materials from 3M to fill a number of different teeth. We'll do class 2s, we'll do back-to-backs, we'll do class 4s, class 3s. We're going to just do a whole bunch of different stuff, but it's a great value at $325. You get all the materials on your screen, and you get to keep that stuff, so including the typing on. So that's a heck of a deal for 3 hours of hands-on CE education. If you have questions about that course, use my personal email address for that one as well, and we'll get you that information right away. And for this evening's course, this is a CE event. We'll have 1 hour of lecture credit for you. We will send you at the end of tonight a course evaluation and brief quiz. So please fill those out in their entirety and hit the submit button on the bottom, and the system will turn around and send you a course verification certificate. It does come by email, so please be sure to check your spam folder. Those types of documents seem to get caught a lot, so make sure you check that out before you let us know that you didn't get it. If you're an AGD member, there is a spot to put your 6-digit AGD member number. Please do that, and we'll go ahead and send that into the AGD on your behalf. And if you have questions related to getting your CE credit, you don't get the quiz, you don't get your CE certificate, those types of questions, use the webinar at garrisondental.com email address. I have a couple people that monitor that, and we'll be able to get you that information more quickly than if you send it to my personal email. All right, so what we're going to talk about tonight, we're here to talk about sectional matrix systems. This is a beginner's course. We're going to talk about some very beginner topics. You know, why does a sectional matrix system do what it does? What makes it different than a Toffelmeyer that allows it to perform so much better? We're going to talk about selecting your first few cases as you're getting started with the sectional matrix system. We'll look at some different systems and you know, go through the bits and pieces that come in a kit so that you can understand what their purposes are. And then we're going to go over the Typodont and spend some time very methodically stepping through how to place these place the sectional matrix. We're not going to be talking about bonding agents and etching and composites and that kind of stuff. That's not covered at all this evening. This is about how to put the nuts and bolts in place so that you can get a nice tight contact. We'll have lots of tips and tricks for you. And then of course at the end, we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So please, again, be sure to be typing those questions in as we go through this evening. So first of all, why do we care? Why do we care about using a sectional matrix system? It really comes down to I guess I'd call it a traditional method of using a circumferential band, a Toffelmeyer band, or even some of the retainerless type systems out there. They have a real tendency to create contact that are similar to what's in that red oval, where you've got a point contact very high, right at the marginal ridge, very frangible, big food trap below that, and a real opportunity for recurrent carries. And it's just, you can get a tight contact, but it's not as easy to get it where you actually want the contact to be. So that was an issue for many, many years until folks started using sectional matrix systems. And then Garrison, it was almost 25 years ago now, came out with the very first system that really did a good job and really kind of set the standard at that point. And there's been quite a few different iterations from there. And the whole area of sectional matrix is really developed wonderfully over the last, I would say, 10 years. So many great innovations by a number of different companies that have really made these a wonderful tool for you to use in your everyday practice, where you can get a nice broad contact at the height of contour, the marginal ridge, so much easier to control that, no food trap, less opportunity for recurrent carries. It's just an overall a great thing. And I think one of the things as long as we're on this slide, I want to point this out. Contact point is something that happens with a circumferential system. A contact surface, not a point, but a surface, is what we're really aiming for with the sectional. It's not that you've got two spheres that are touching at one tiny little point, but you've got an entire area where the teeth are touching nice and firmly to help prevent food impaction and natural function. So that concept of a contact surface, I think, is important. So one of the key features of a sectional matrix system is the separator ring, and that's some people call them retainer rings. Yes, they do help to retain the bands in place, but their function is to press vigorously interproximally to help drive the teeth further apart than what you can achieve with a wedge by itself. And again, that really helps to compensate for the polymerization shrinkage. It compensates for the thickness of the matrix band and allows you to manipulate that band to produce the ideal contact. So that's the key feature here, is how much force is being generated interproximally to drive those teeth apart. The other part's right in the name, sectional, right? Not circumferential, sectional. And by having the bands separate from one another, if you're doing an MOD, or even if you're doing just a MO or a DO, just a two-surface filling, by having them separate from one another, it allows you to manipulate each band without being held back by the opposing side. I use an MOD in this image here to demonstrate it, but even if it is just an MO or just a DO, with a band that's going all the way around, it's fighting you. You're trying to get this band in nice tight contact with the adjacent tooth, and the opposite side is fighting you. So having them separate allows you to independently manipulate that band to get it right where you want it. So that's why a sectional matrix system works. and we will get into the actual placement of that here in just a couple of minutes. So what I want to talk to you about next is picking the right case. So many of you, it'd be nice if we were face to face so I could see a show of hands to ask, how many of you have a sectional matrix kit in your office already that maybe has been languishing in a drawer for a number of years because you tried it and it didn't go very well the first time you tried it, and so it ends up in the drawer or the supply closet at the back of the office. We hear those stories all the time from folks that they weren't successful on their first couple of attempts using it, or they were concerned or not comfortable starting to use it. So they got a kit, and boy, that thing just sits there, and that's a shame. One thing that you can do for yourself is not try to do a case like this right off the bat. I mean, this is about as complicated as you're going to get with the sectional matrix system. And next month in June, our first webinar in June, we'll talk about doing cases like this. That's the advanced sectional matrix techniques. And we'll walk through on a Type-It-Out how do you get a good result on something like this. But for your first case, boy, that's just not where you really want to start out. You want to start out with something far more straightforward. A really wide prep is also not a great place to start. There are some additional complications when you're dealing with cases like this, where maybe they've fractured a cusp off, or the decay is so severe where you've got something that extends past the line angles. So we can do those with a sectional. It takes a little bit of a different technique, so don't pick something like that as your first case. What we're looking for really is the Goldilocks case to start. No pun intended with the gold tooth there, but we want a restoration that is not too deep, not too wide, that hopefully you've broken the contact in the act of prepping the tooth, because having remaining contact can make things quite difficult. If you pick the right first case to eliminate some of those technicalities that can make it more challenging, you can get a much better result. Like, here we see, yeah, we're a little wide here, but not too much, where our contact is broken. We're not deep. We're not past the gingiva here. So, we don't have any extra complications there, and it's not an MOD. We only have to use one ring to restore this. So this is a pretty good place to start. Same here, pretty basic DO that allows us to not have to deal with some of the extra constraints, and therefore right away we can hopefully get a nice contact like this where things really look nice, and you get that confidence going. You start being able to do more advanced type cases. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn off my screen, and I'm going to share my camera with you so that that's nice and big on your screen, hopefully. And let's talk about all the little pieces, parts that make up a sectional matrix system. We're going to start with rings. It says, because that's the main part, it really is. The rings themselves are generally the most expensive part of a sectional matrix system, and they come in a whole lot of different flavors. And here's 3 different companies. For tonight, when we're demonstrating on the Type-It-Out, yes, I'm going to use the Garrison sectional matrix system. And while we're sponsored by Garrison, I try to make sure that I talk about the differences between some of the systems, but I want to make sure you understand that for what I'm showing you tonight, any one of these are going to work. Whether you're using the Trident Palanet system or the BioClear system. All those systems can work very, very well. The sectional matrix systems have come such a nice long way that that you can get really good results with all of these, particularly with the basic type of restoration that we're going to do this evening. Of course, we'll be demonstrating with the Garrison. There is something I wanted to point out. This question came in actually before we started this evening. Doctor had sent it in just before we got started, saying that Sometimes they're using, they've got both Triad and Garrison systems in their office, and they're having challenges with the rings popping off sometimes. And that is, gosh, that's frustrating, you know, because you've already put the band in place, you've already got the wedge in there, and you put the ring on and ping, that thing comes off of there. And, you know, half the time it takes the band out with it, and it's just very, very frustrating. So let's talk about why that happens and how you can avoid it. The reason why it happens, and I'm going to zoom in here a little closer so we can get a good view of this. Hang out with me just a second. Let's talk about why rings pop off the teeth. The rings like these, they all fit over the wedge. They've got a little notch in the bottom so that they fit over top of the wedge. So they're not using the wedge at all to retain on the teeth. They are using the infrabulge of the tooth itself to grip. And as we look down the line, this ring, the tips are almost parallel. It makes it much more challenging for this ring to grip the tooth. This one, we've got a little bit of an angle here that allows it to grip better. And then this, of course, we've got a very significant, I don't know what you would want to call that, retentive extension on here to grip down below the infrabulge to help it grip. So number one, the type of ring itself can make a very huge difference in how well it grips on the tooth. And then the placement, any of these rings can pop off. Particularly on a malpositioned tooth, a very short tooth, pedodontic applications. The smaller the tooth, the more difficult it is for them to grip, particularly if the infrabulge is not up above the gum line, because you don't want to clamp this, any of these on a patient's gum tissue. You want to be on the tooth structure, and if the infrabulge is not up above the gum line, it makes it very, very difficult. So there are cases that a ring just is not going to stay, and it's not going to matter what ring you use. So, but again, choosing rings that have more of a significant gripping function will help significantly. And then when you're placing them, making sure that that gripping portion is as far gingivally placed as you can make it will assist with that. So that's how you get them to stay in place. Now, why do we have all of these beautiful little colors, right? They're all for different reasons. And this is my cautionary tale for you, is to make sure that before you start using your kit, whatever kit you have, make sure you read the instructions so you know where each manufacturer wants you to place each ring. This system and this system have a ring for the bicuspids and a ring for molars. And it's very important that you put them in the appropriate location. That will significantly help you with the rings popping off. And it will also, some of these, you can damage them if you put a bicuspid ring on a wide molar. You're actually overstretching it in order to get it in place, and you can actually break the rings. So make sure you know where those rings go. The Garrison rings, it's not bicuspid and premolar. It's long and short. See that? Blue is short, orange is long. And that's to allow for stacking when doing multiple tooth restorations. Also, on a taller tooth, the taller ring helps to mold the band to the tooth all the way up the neck of the tooth, so it gives you a little bit superior seal. The blue one will grip on short teeth very well on top of rubber dam clamps, but know where to put it. It doesn't matter whether you put the blue ring on a bicuspid or a molar, it matters how tall is the tooth. Is there a rubber dam and clamp in place that you're dealing with? So make sure you know. And like in this, the Garrison system, the green ring is completely different. Look at that thing, right? great big wide tip for doing really wide preparations. So know where to place them so that you're putting them in the optimal location to get the best performance. And that's regardless of which system that you're using. So that's the rings, right? We've got lots of fun rings there. And by golly, there are just so many different ring systems out there on the market. Here's a little small sample I've got. I've got rings from just all over the place in here. Some you may have never even seen before. Some of the stuff I don't even know if it's still on the market. There's actually a new system we're going to be taking a look at here pretty soon. It's coming out of Europe. So, the next time we do this, hopefully I'll have some of that material as well, so we can include that because it's important to know what's out there. But gosh, these things are so much easier to place now. These old style, just plain metal rings, they work, right? They worked great 25 years ago. They still work the same way now. Just that this is so much easier. It does such a better job, reduces the flash, provides more tooth separating pressure, so much easier to put the ring on the tooth than with the old plain metal loops. So if you've got a box of these laying around your office that and you struggled with it in the past, you definitely want to upgrade to one of the newer systems because they are just a world of difference as far as the ease of placement. So let's talk about matrix bands. A lot of times you see them like this now, right? They're colored like this. Get all these different ones in here. I'm going to grab a kind of an old style sectional band. So the first question, when you look at what you have in your office, or you're making a decision about what to purchase for your office, is understanding the difference in the bands. The materials are very, very similar. Everybody's system right now, they're using a dead soft, or some systems do have available a firmer, harder metal, but they're all about the same thickness. They're all running around that 15/10 thousandths. The vast majority of matrix bands used are 15/10 thousandths dead soft stainless steel, very flexible, very malleable. The color on these other ones, that was something we developed, I don't know, how long ago was that? I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago now. It's a coating that prevents the bonding agents from adhering to the stainless steel. If you're using a bonding, some of the new universal bonding agents, they stick to about everything, right? Well, that includes dead soft stainless steel, and you can glue these things right in place, which is making for a very bad day in the office. So I would encourage you to try some of the coated. There's multiple companies that have coated sectional bands, and it does make the removal of the band much, much easier. It also makes telling the bands apart far easier. So why do we have all these different sizes? And size is the key. It's generally the gingival occlusal height of the band. So when we're selecting a band for placement, we want to pick a band that most closely approximates the occlusal height of the tooth. We want to be right at, or just a smidge above the marginal ridge of that tooth. If we pick a really short band and put it on a tall tooth, we can actually cover the top edge of that with composite and make it virtually impossible to get out of there. And if the band is far too tall on a short tooth, the tendency is to overfill the tooth, and then you've got to cut back that marginal ridge, and you end up with kind of a blocky, unnatural marginal ridge. So selecting the band height will really help with that. And trying to make sure that you only have one matrix band when you go to place them. They do like to kind of stick together. So if you kind of drop them on a metal tray, you'll make sure that you don't have more than one of them. So common question we used to get is, which side's up? What goes to the marginal ridge? What goes to the gingiva? It's really easy now with the tabbed bands. The tab goes up, right? You can't put that down into the gingiva, so the tab goes up. The older style bands, which there's still millions of restorations done with this style matrix band every year, it's concave to the occlusal. smiley side up, concave to the occlusal. So if I was placing this band, I'd grip it by corner, top edge, so that I could place the band. So these, of course, the placement tab, you just grab that tab and place the band. So concave to the occlusal if you've got this side, or use the tab. Okay, so that's part 2 of a sectional system. Part 3 are the wedges. And the wedge performs 2 functions. When you're using a circumferential band, that is the sole source of your tooth separating pressure. So you really have to drive that wedge in very, very firmly in order to get enough tooth separation. It's kind of a bit of a quandary, right? The bigger of a wedge that you use and the harder you drive it in, the greater the size of the food trap that you're creating, right? That's not any good. So with a sectional system, the wedge, while it does still help to separate the tooth, it's more about sealing the band to the tooth, preventing any saliva, crevicular fluid, any blood, anything from getting past that matrix band up into your prep to contaminate it. So it's all the systems nowadays, they've got their own particular design of wedge. They've got different features and benefits, and you have to kind of decide which makes sense for you. You should be aware that if you're using a Garrison ring, that doesn't mean that you have to use a Garrison wedge. This stuff will all play pretty well together. It's really a personal preference as to which style of wedge that you end up using with which system. So, but they all usually come in a kit. Sectional matrix system, you buy the kit and it's got bands and wedges and rings and all this kind of stuff in it. So, I would encourage you to try the wedges that came in your kit. And then if you're not particularly happy with them, shop around, try some different wedges. These have little soft fingers on them. See that? So as you insert that, it helps prevent back out, but this is also to help seal the band against the tooth if you've got some interproximal irregularities in that tooth surface. That'll help hold that band against the tooth to prevent any leakage. So generally speaking, if we look at, if I look at reorder information at Garrison Dental, the blue wedge is the most commonly used size, yellow, or followed by orange, then yellow and green. So, and there's no real trick as far as selecting a wedge to fit in any particular interproximal space. It's all by feel. If it's loose when you put it in, you want to go a size bigger. If you can't get the wedge all the way through the interproximal space, you need to go a size smaller. So there's no real key there. But again, just based on what people are using, blue or orange are going to be your most common sizes. And just because they're color coded doesn't mean they go together. Okay, I don't need to use an orange wedge with an orange ring or a blue wedge and a blue ring. Okay, I don't need to do that. It all comes down to what's appropriate for that tooth. Is it a blue wedge and an orange ring and a green matrix band? That might be the appropriate combination for that tooth. So don't get hung up on that the color coding means that it has to be used a certain way. It's all mix and match for the case that is sitting in your chair. When you get, click the wrong button here. When you get a kit, generally speaking, it is going to have some sort of a forceps for placement of the rings. And so I want to just zoom out a little bit. I strongly recommend using if you've got a Trident system, use a Trident forceps. Garrison system, use a Garrison forceps, and so on. Because the forceps are designed to fit with that company's rings. And I got, what have I got here? I've got a dense ply Paladin forceps here. I've got a regular ivory style rubber dam clamp forceps, Garrison forceps. This is the perfect instrument for the placement of rubber dam clamps. It is the worst instrument for the placement of sectional matrix rings. Don't use a rubber dam clamp forceps. It just makes the job so much harder. I don't care whose system you got. If you choke up on the ring far enough to get any kind of control on it, you're stabbing the patient with the tips of the forceps. If you go way out here, you've got nothing to hold the ring, and it doesn't matter which ring you're using. It's the same. There's nothing to hold that ring and allow you to control it. It makes placement radically harder. Don't use it. Use it for rubber dam clamps. Use the forceps that came with your kit. If you don't have them, get them. It just makes the job that much easier. No movement, excellent control. If I'm using the dense ply system, I'm using their forceps. Again, it is made to fit the ring, gives really good control and allows you to open the ring appropriately. So that's a key thing. I've talked to so many people over the years that are, struggling to control that ring during placement, and it's because they're using the wrong forceps. All right, so we've talked about all these components. Again, generally it comes in some sort of a kit. There's a selection of the different sizes because you do need those. You're going to settle in and generally use the mid-size bands more frequently than the really large ones or the really small ones. It's just like the wedges. You're going to use more of the intermediate sizes than you are of the really large or small ones. And some kits come with other little doodads in them. This one's got a few polishing cups and points in it, and a few odds and ends. So stuff that the different manufacturers want you to try. So I do encourage you to get a kit if you don't have one. Don't buy just pieces, parts. Get a kit because there'll be times when you need some of those different sizes, and it's if you haven't worked with the system before, it's really hard to get the right stuff ordering it separate. Ordering a pack of refills of this and a pack of refills of that. Get the kits. It's just a better way to go. So let's talk about placing this stuff. So let's zoom in nice and close. And we're going to do our little Goldilocks case. Just a pretty basic DO on a bicuspid. All right. What do we got here? 9, 10, 11, 12. DO on number 12. And the first step is ensuring that you can get the matrix band in. They're dead soft. If you try to force a matrix band into a location where the contact is still there, it's not going to go in. You're going to crush the band. You're going to do that a couple of times and you're going to get really frustrated. There are some tricks. This one is pretty close, but it is open. So I'm going to demonstrate something for you here. If you're struggling to get the matrix band in because you've got a little bit of contact left, or it's a really tight gap like this one, even though it is not in contact, you can take an instrument and torque it a little bit. Okay, now this type it out moves a little bit differently, but if you torque it just a little bit, have your assistant hold that, that'll give you a little bit more room to slide the band in, and all you have to do is get it past the little sticking point and it'll go in much easier. So, but this one is open enough. I'm going to go ahead and place the band, and I'm going to guess It's not much of a guess. I know this patient pretty well. Been working on this tooth for years now. I'm going to take a purple band, and that is a mid-sized band. I'm going to orient it so that the colored portion, the non-stick portion, is towards the restoration. And some people just put these in with their fingers. I mean, it does it matter? No, whatever it takes to get the band in place. That's the appropriate instrument. So this is a band placement and removal forceps, so it does make that job a little bit easier, except when I drop the matrix band on the floor. That never happens to you, right? You never drop an instrument on the floor or a wedge or any of that stuff, especially when we're on live television like this. Okay, so we'll grab that by the tab. And one of the features of these more modern bands is that they're curved to wrap around the tooth more significantly than older style bands. These guys are not nearly as curved, right? If you have these, curve them before you put them in place. Just take them and you know, curl them a little in your fingers. What that will do is after the band is in place, the ends of the band will be out of your way a little bit more. If it's sticking straight out, it can make ring placement quite challenging. So I'm going to go back to my purple one. And they're contoured gingivally occlusively as well as buccolingually. So you can't just push it straight down because that curvature in there. So what you want to do is kind of roll it around the infrabulge of the tooth. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to work it. See, I'm kind of working that thing right around that curvature of the tooth so that it slides down in. Sometimes the edge of the band, you know, 15/10 thousandths, you know, it's sharp. Even it's not sharpened, but because it's so thin, it's sharp, and it will catch sometimes on the edges, the margins of the prep. If that happens, if you feel, let me grab that tab again here, as you're inserting it, if you feel it catching, you or your assistant can get in there with an explorer and just guide it past that sticking point a little bit, right? So, but what you don't want to do is put a lot of pressure on it because it's dead soft. It will just crush. So ease it past that sticking point. Once it's in there, take your fingers. Make sure the ends are out of the way like that. You want to have it, you know, roughly in the middle, right? And that tab kind of helps with that. Once you have the band in there, you can kind of bend that tab back over the adjacent tooth so you see, you know, that you're right in the middle. Wedging, you want to wedge from the widest embrasure. On this particular tooth, my prep does tend towards the lingual more than the buccal. And so I've got definitely a wider gap here. And the taper of the wedge will help fill that gap and support the matrix band down by the gingival margin. Same here on this MOD. This side, we've got this wide area here. We want to fill that with the wedge to help support the band. So when I wedge this from the lingual, I'm going to hold my finger on top of that band, and I'm not going to fool around with it. I'm holding that. I am applying a significant amount of apical pressure on there. Hold it in place and drive the wedge in. If you don't hold the band in place, you're just going to push it right out with the wedge. Particularly these wedges with that little rubber coating on there, they'll grab that band and push it right out of there. So you need to be aggressive. You need to hold that band in place. I see some people try to hold it like this. You can if you can get your fingers in there. I have big fingers. It's far easier for me just to hold it on top because I want to hold it down And that will also, because of the tab, will also help prevent the buccolingual motion of the band. So hold it down pretty aggressively. Now, the ring. So these rings are designed to be placed with the loop of the ring towards the front of the mouth. And they're angled a little bit like this to help the loop of the ring rise up over the curve of spee, or if you've got some shorter premolars, bicuspids, to raise them up over longer anterior teeth. So that is what that is for. It also helps with stacking the rings. When I grip the ring, you want to make sure on the different rings, you know where to grip it. This ring, they've got a notched area in here to grip the ring. You don't want to grip it back on the metal. You'll overstress the back part of the ring. You might snap it. Grip it up here where it's supposed to be gripped. Same thing on this style. They put a little notch in here so that to kind of indicate where you can grip it. If you can accidentally grab it back here on the wire, you know, you don't want to do that. You want to grip it up here. It'll make the ring easier to open and put less stress on the back part of the ring. Same here. We've got, instead of plastic up front to grip, we've got a metal area to engage the little hooks here. So grab it on the metal, not on the plastic. You can actually break that if you're not careful. So grab it on the metal, and again, because you're moving the forceps up toward the end of the ring here, gives you more leverage too, and makes this easier on your hands to open, which is really important if you have smaller hands, or you know, if you've got a little carpal tunnel or arthritis or something like that, that might affect your grip strength. Gripping it up here by the tips with the Garrison forceps will make it easier to open for you. As we're placing it, we're not going to come straight in and come straight down. If the ends of that band are sticking out a little bit, I can hook the ends of the band with the bottom part of the ring and then crush it as I'm trying to place it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, actually, because this is a Dio, I'm going to come from behind it. And I'm going to angle the tips like this in so that I'm hitting the band and pushing it out of the way. So let's see what that looks like from here. So I'm going to come from behind into the band, and I'm going to push the ends of those bands out of the way and place the ring. Do it one more time. So I'm going to come from behind it, into it, and rotate it down. If I was on an MO, I can just do this real quick over here. If I'm on an MO placement, I'm not putting this in all perfect here. I'm just shoving it in so I can show you how the ring goes in place. On an MO, I'm going to come from in front of the band into it and down. Okay, so that's the difference. If it's an MO, I'm going to come from the front and down. If it's a DO, I'm going to come from behind and into it. Okay, now I mentioned earlier, when you're placing the ring, make sure that you're seating it as far gingivally as possible. You want the tips to engage not on the sulcus, but right down on, you know, butting up against it over top of the wedge. Okay, see that? All the way around. And now we can see how the silicone here helps to engage the tooth and mold that band of the tooth and eliminate flash. So that's a nice feature. But it really grips on there when you've got it placed correctly. If you release that ring and you're past, you know, you release it and you're way up here on the neck of the tooth, you know, it's going to pop off. So make sure it's seated down a little bit. Again, apical pressure. The wedge is going to prevent it from going too far down. a little apical pressure as you're releasing it. Make sure that it stays down. And then, use your fingers, push on it, make sure it's in place, because you don't want to have that thing moving around on you when we're working on our next couple of steps. So once we're in place here, we want to give this band a push, okay? It is not a hard scrubbing, burnishing motion. It is a push. I just want to make sure that the band where I want it in contact with the tooth is in fact up against that adjacent tooth. So our last thing we're going to do before you start to etch and bond is we're going to inspect. Now I can't quite get the light down in there real well, but I want to look around the margins, the interface between the band and the tooth, particularly down at the gingival margin. I want to make sure that that band is tight against that tooth and sealed. If I have any kind of a gap down here, that means I'm going to have an overhang. And certainly if there's any kind of if you can see the wedge, stop, back up, start over again. That means you didn't have the matrix band seated far enough gingivally when you drove the wedge in, or perhaps you weren't holding the band firmly enough, and as you drove the wedge in, it popped up. If you can see the wedge, stop and start over again. Bad sign. You're going to get contamination. You're going to have all kinds of trouble. And I talk about this inspecting particularly the bottom of the box, because where do class 2s fail? Most of the time they fail at the bottom of the box, and that was either because the contact was inadequate and you had a food trap to get recurrent caries, or you had improperly sealed matrix band and you got contamination down there, or you didn't get your bonding agent in your etchant, your bonding agent down in there properly. So make sure that your micro brush is small enough to easily get down in here so that you can get the materials down in there, because that's where it's going to fail. So etch, bond, and fill, whether you're doing a bulk fill or you're using flowable first, or whatever your personal technique is, you're going to fill that. And on your last increment, what you can do is take an Explorer or a very thin bladed composite instrument and just roll that marginal ridge off before you cure. You want to form that marginal ridge anatomically in the uncured composite, then cure it, because it's so much harder to try to cut any kind of real anatomy in there with a rotary instrument. So once you've completed, you've polymerized, your last layer, we just reverse the steps. We're going to take the ring off. We're going to pull the wedge out. Now the band is going to be in there pretty firmly, so definitely make sure that both ends of the band are peeled away from the tooth, and either a band placement forceps like this with little carbide teeth in it, or a little curved mosquito hemostat can work pretty well for this. Get a big grip. Don't just grab a little corner. Come all the way down alongside that band like that. Okay, well, it doesn't matter whether you do a buckle or lingual, but get all the way down alongside that band. Get as big a bite as you can before you go to lift it out, because if you tear off the ends of the band and leave just a small portion of that interproximally, it can be really hard to get out of there. So you want to get it all the first time around. Okay, so let's go back. I want to cover just a couple more things here before we go to our Q&A. Okay, so we're a couple of notes here about some tips from a friend of ours out in California. He's got a pretty good size pedodontic practice out there, and one of our all-time best customers. He's even done a couple of webinars with us, and Dr. Josh Solomon sent along these tips and a couple of slides here, or a couple of case photos that I think are really very good demonstrators. First of all, look down in here. Get this up on the screen here. See how well sealed this band is? That's what you want to see. You don't want to see any gaps. Gaps mean problems. Note this little kink right here in the band. That was intentional. He pushed that band over here to close a little tiny gap between the ring and the band up at the marginal ridge here. You could pack a little piece of Teflon tape in here to help hold it, particularly if you're using a heavier bodied composite. As you compress that composite into the cavity space, this band, because it is dead soft, will want to deflect back out and you get some flash here. So just a little ball of Teflon tape can help seal that off. Teflon tape is a tremendous resource on class twos, that's for sure. A couple of his tips, check occlusion first and then take a digital photo of the marks from the articulating paper. That'll give you a pretty good idea where you want to recreate that natural occlusion. He's a big fan of pre-wedging. I highly recommend it. It can make band placement a lot easier. By putting a wedge in before you start to cut the prep, you're going to protect the papilla from nicking it. You're going to help create additional separation. You're going to have a really nice visual reference as you get deeper in the box with your rotary instrumentation. And again, because there is a little bit more space in there, hopefully it'll help you prevent from nicking the adjacent tube. Making sure that the contact is open, including towards the bottom of the box, so that you get the band in. Checking that band, we talked about that. Inspect, inspect, inspect. The burnish, again, I recommend a more of a push than a hard burnish, because you can actually put lines in the band, and those lines are going to be in the composite then, going to create some rough spots. We talked about rolling the marginal ridge with the Explorer, but then he's got a pretty conservative approach to back-to-backs. That's our number one question that we get, and we do cover that in depth in our course next month. So I would encourage you to join us for the advanced sectional matrix course. Again, that's a free course. It'll be on a Tuesday night in the beginning of June, and we'll go through the back-to-back stuff. All right, let's come here, cursor, there you are. Okay, a couple of things about the rings. All the rings I showed you tonight, in fact, most of the sectional matrix rings that are sold on the market now have plastic on them. You don't want to use any harsh chemicals on that, but you do want to make sure they are clean before they go in the autoclave. We see some pretty nasty pictures come in, case pictures sometimes, because the rings have not been cleaned properly before autoclaving, and they will get just kind of nasty looking with accumulated bonding agent composite on there. And once it's gone through the autoclave, it's very difficult to remove. It is not difficult to remove before you do that. So make sure that your staff is cleaning them properly before they autoclave. My favorite saying of all times, sterilization is not a substitute for proper cleaning. Clean it first, then sterilize it. Make sure that you're using the right forceps and a little bit of caution when you are opening the rings. That's when you stretch them out. All rings will fatigue and stretch over time. It's just the nature of the beast. Anytime you have a spring and you work it back and forth numerous times, it will fatigue and lose its strength. But you can keep them working longer for you by being a little cautious in how you place them, and making sure you're using the right instrument so that it's easier to place them. So the tendency is, if you're struggling, is to crank it open farther, and then you start to stretch the ring. And don't leave them in the forceps. The forceps I showed you tonight all have little locking bars on them. Don't lock the ring open with the locking bar and have it sitting on the tray while you're doing all the rest of your prep work. Again, it's just fatigue on the metals. So have it left on your tray. You pick it up with your forceps when you need to place it. All right, quick review, and then we're on to the Q&A. Make sure you're doing the right cases. Pick the right cases until you get comfortable with it. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Burnish the band. You want to make sure it's in contact where you want it to be in contact before you start to fill, and inspect, inspect, inspect. If you're having any trouble, give us a call, send us an email. We can do one-on-one Zoom type call with you and be able to walk through the difficulties that you're having and help you out. I mean, that's what we're here for, and we want to make sure that you're successful. You can also go out to our YouTube channel. We've got a very busy, thriving YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe. We're posting new content out there all the time. Lots of great tips and tricks. And if you've got, you get out there and you don't see what you're looking for, let us know. And that's a great idea for us to make a new video. All right, Miss Kendall, what have we got for questions?
The first question is there any guidance on selecting the best systems for different clinical scenarios? And the two that were listed were the clear system and the compositite system.
Right, right. As I mentioned, the systems now have plenty of similarities. So it's really, looking at, and they have a very similar application technique. I can't really say that one performs better in certain circumstances other than, again, we're Garrison, and you take it for, with a grain of salt, but the Garrison rings do retain on the teeth better. They retain in more situations, including the distal of the canine, short teeth, malpositioned teeth, pedodontic applications, where other rings can really struggle. And the silicone faces reduced flash, the wide prep ring, it's the only thing like it on the market anywhere. Nobody else has that and can really make wide, extra wide restorations far simpler. So, but definitely do your homework. We're not talking about a $30 item. The kits are hundreds of dollars, and you want to make sure that for the way that you practice, you're getting, you know what you're getting, and you get what works for you. And don't be afraid to try a few of them. Some of our best customers are also our competitors' best customers because they find in their hands that one works in a situation better than another. So, definitely, shop around and try some different things and find what works in your hands.
And I think that question was also referencing two of our systems, Kevin. So like what's the differences between picking between the different systems that like one
Oh,
manufacturer
sure.
may?
Yeah, for crying out loud, we got what, 5 or 6 of them? We've got every one we've ever made is still available and for sale. What I could tell you right now is there is no question in my mind whatsoever. The system I showed you tonight, we've had that out for 5 years now. And of our systems, it is hands down the best, easiest to use, widest range of applications. It's the number one. It's the number one of all sectional matrix. It's the number one in the world.
If you're having issues with the distal of cuspids for getting natural contours, what can you do, especially if they're very flat and the marginal ridge is poor?
Yeah, let me see if I've got a type of here. I've got one here I can show you. The distal of the canine, we do have, some significantly different anatomy that we're dealing with versus our other posterior teeth. The shape of this is radically different, and in this direction, right, is also a very different shape. So you definitely have to use a short band. unless the, you know, really extends up towards the incisal edge of the tooth. And I think I could probably use my same orange wedge here. The hardest part with using a sectional in this scenario, and again, in this particular case, let me pull this back out again. Now, it's hard for me to tell if there would have the little MO here, see that? Kind of hard to see, fairly small. And it may, you know, if this tooth was intact here, it may not actually have involved the contact area, and you could have just used a mylar strip in there without any grief whatsoever. I've seen some people do a lot of different things here because of the shape of the tooth. Let me grab a different band here. See if I've got a little one. I can use this little one right here. I have seen people place a band vertically in that scenario because they're trying to recreate that shape a little bit more. I'm not sure that really helps with using a dead soft band in that case, because you can, you know, you can manipulate that dead soft band into any shape you want, whether you place it vertically or horizontally. What I'd call more of a traditional placement. But the ring, if there is contact that has been broken by the prep, let me show you the situation with the ring. I'm going to use a pretty traditional placement here. I do recommend using the blue ring in these scenarios. The blue ring seems to grip better on the distal of the canine than the other. And making sure that you haven't, depending on where the restoration is, that you haven't actually covered where you're trying to access. The ring's still going to provide some separating pressure here to help with the contact, but you may have to manipulate that band a little more aggressively to give you access. It does grip pretty well here, and this is a scenario where, grab this one here, where it is important. All right, forceps, there we go. This one, not so much. So the distal of the canine is the hardest spot for any of the sectional matrix systems to grip. Blue ring does an adequate job there. There will be cases where you're not going to be able to use a ring to get separating pressure, and you're going to be stuck having to wedge to get the separating pressure.
We are past time, so I did pop the evaluation and quiz in the chat window, Kevin.
Let me put the code up on here quick a second. We'll keep answering questions here. We want to make sure everybody gets their questions answered if we can. But you do need to write this down, either take a quick screenshot here or whatever you need to do. You need this code WB522A. That is the code for tonight. You'll have to put that on your evaluation before you send it in. You can use that same code on the Garrison website for $20 off anything. That's in the US only, and valid till the 20th this month. So Kendall did put a link, as she mentioned, to the quiz. If you'd like to go ahead and get started on that, by all means, feel free. We're in the Q&A part, so there's not any requirement for you to stick around unless you just want to hear the answers to the questions.
Next question is, if you do have cement on your rings, cured cement, how can you remove it?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I don't have any in my possession, actually, that I have bonding agent or composite on. And I'll tell you why. Every time I try to actually etch bond and cure something on one of these rings, I can flick it off of here with a fingernail. I don't think it's until after it goes through the autoclave that it's on there really hard, and then you may have to use a scaler or some other kind of an instrument to actually scrape that material off. It does not impact the performance. It just doesn't look very nice. So again, make sure your staff knows to clean them off. If there's anything on there, just scrape it off before they autoclave it.
When you're first placing composite, the wedge feels like it's in place, but by the end of packing and curing, the wedge feels loose. If you
Sure.
feel like you need the wedge to hold the matrix band against the tooth to prevent flash, what are any tips that you could recommend?
Right. What's happening is the ring, again, it's a spring, and this thing is strong, right? So the whole time you're working, it's squeezing, right? It's squeezing it approximately, pushing the teeth farther and farther apart. So a wedge that felt really firm before you put the ring on might start to feel kind of loose. And that is very common. And I'm not going to put a band in here, but what I would recommend, and this is one of the cool things that you can do with, all these rings, all of them have the notch, right? All of them. So you can adjust the wedge as you go. So I didn't put a band in here, but this is just to show you, okay, I can get to the end of that wedge. And if, after my ring is in place, let's say I've etched and I'm getting ready to bond, I can just snug that wedge up. And you know what? If it feels really, really loose, I can take it out and I can put a bigger one in.
Next question is, how do you place a band subgingivally without it being pushed upwards?
Yeah, sub-G restorations are a challenge. The deeper they go, the more difficult they are. The best thing going, I think, right now for sub-G, number one, it's not everybody has them, obviously, but if you had one of those, the soft tissue lasers are just really handy for this to trim back some of that extra interdental papilla to help with visibility and everything. What I just grabbed out of my little box, this is a firm band. Okay, it is not dead soft. It's actually quite springy. All right, I can squeeze it and it bounces back. If I do that with this band, I squeeze it and I smush it. Okay, what that allows you to do, a firm band allows you to drive this thing down alongside the tooth into the sulcus and apply pressure to force it down in there. And again, you need to hold that in place. If you're going to wedge, I've seen people, in fact, I'm trying to remember who sent me the case. I just saw one the other day where they're, instead of driving the wedge through, they're driving the wedge, here, this one's a deeper one. It's hard to do on this type of knot, but they're driving the wedge down, okay? And you see how that's not protruding through, it's down into the gingiva. Let me grab another orange one here, not that that matters, but, and then if you need to, again, getting that tip of the wedge subgingivally to pin the firm metal band up against the tooth. And you can even come from the other direction at the same time. Some people are packing a little cord down there, right? Or Teflon tape. They'll take several thicknesses of Teflon tape and roll it together like a piece of floss and get it down alongside the band, between the band and the sulcus, and then take a thin bladed instrument or a cord packer and pack that down in there. Because again, the name of the game is pinning the bottom of that band up against the tooth. Oftentimes they will, for fear of contamination, they will build that up with a little bit of glass ionomer, something that is not so sensitive to moisture.
Can the rings and forceps not be put in an ultrasonic cleaner before you steam autoclave?
I'm trying to remember what our official online sterilization guide talks about there. In our testing we do, I mean, we have an ultrasonic cleaner. We've got the, several varieties of steam autoclave, even the heavy duty dishwasher type systems. And I mean, when we run these things through a ultrasonic cleaner, we're putting in like 3 times the amount of cleaner is what the label says. We're again trying to worst case scenario torture test, and it doesn't impact these. I can't say that it doesn't impact all the systems because these are different types of plastic, and I'm not, I don't know, how these would perform. I do know that these are pretty solid through that. And the forceps doesn't matter, it's just stainless steel. It's not going to get hurt by ultrasonic cleaner. Composite instruments that you get from Garrison, you want to make sure if you put them in an ultrasonic cleaner, they're in a cassette so that the ends are not rubbing against other things where it'll rub the coating off.
Is it recommended that a safety ligature be placed on matrix rings?
Absolutely. Good question. Yeah, always tie a piece of floss on these. It just super important. Yeah, you want to make sure you can retrieve that ring if it becomes dislodged.
Can you wedge with the intention to separate the teeth or solely to adapt the band? And the example is wooden wedges that give too heavy of contacts.
Well, the wooden wedges are generally more firm than, I don't have some of the other companies' wedges here, but all of these have more give to them that help you get a good seal. The wooden wedge, of course, you're driving that in there pretty hard, and the wooden wedges cannot be shaped as anatomically as the plastic can. There's a limit to how those things can be machined, and so they're just basic triangles. Even the best anatomical ones are just basic triangles. And if you're wedging for contact and using a separator ring, yeah, you can totally get too tight of a contact. And again, if you're wedging really aggressively and firmly, you're also creating a larger gap between the teeth. Your opportunity for a food trap goes up.
Can you talk more specifically about the uses for wanting to use firm bands versus the dead soft bands?
Sure. The firm bands, try to see, that one doesn't really have the contact broken here. So the firm bands are an ideal choice if you've got a very conservative prep and contact hasn't been broken, because you can shove those things down through. I mean, they're tough, right? They don't deform, and you can push them down into places that if you tried to do that like that was really tight, and I just shoved it down through there, right? Not that you'd use the band it was more about a demonstration of the tightness. And look, it didn't deform the band at all. So anytime when you're struggling to get a matrix band placed, I think the firm band is a great option. I think they're a very good indication is a deep prep, like we talked about, just the ability to push the band down in there more aggressively. And, you know, one thing that everybody should note is, you know, the bands, the wedges, the rings are all designed around really kind of ideal anatomy, right? Kind of average anatomy. Well, that's not what sits down in the chair every day. You might get somebody in that, you know what, you need to cut one half of the band off, or you need to cut some shape into the band, or you need to cut the tab off the band, or you need to change the shape of the wedge by, you know, use a rotary instrument to flatten out the top portion of the wedge a little bit. Whatever that is, don't be afraid to modify this stuff to fit the scenario. So, but another indicator for a really the firm bands might be on a really wide prep where you're trying to recreate some of the anatomy of a cusp like that, because the firm band is going to, again, help retain that shape more so than a dead soft.
How do you remove this? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
How do you remove distal lingual flash?
The, you know, ideally is to not get it in the first place by making sure that the band is properly sealed. I don't have I've got one here. A number 12 blade, if you can get in there, it depends on how close or to the gingiva the flash is. You know, if you can get beneath it, you can usually get it with a blade like that. Alternatively, you can use a strip that is designed to get below the contact point. This is a fit strip. You see the center part doesn't have abrasive material on it, and that's to allow you to get that past the contact point and then smooth out any flash like that. This is a Garrison product. You can find that on the website.
Can you flip to the slide about the hands-on course?
Sure can.
And while you're doing that, I'll answer a couple of these questions. So one question is about the webinar being recorded. Yes, it will be recorded. We're recording it right now, and we will send out a link to the recording tomorrow sometime. So keep an eye out for that email. And then your CE certificate will be issued after you submit your evaluation and quiz. It might not be immediate. Sometimes the system has a little bit of a delay, but you will get it. And if you do not get it within 24 hours, you can email us at webinar@garrisondental.com and we'll get that out to you.
Great. Well, is that pretty much all our questions, Kendall?
No, we have some more. What was the saw called that you just showed?
Fit strip. That's fit strip, all one word, and you can find that on the Garrison site. There's a whole bunch of different ones. You know, that's a whole system. Some of them are set up for IPR. Like the one I showed you is more of a interproximal below the contact point finishing. Great for point, you know, if you've got a little excess cement that you can't get out after seating a crown, that's a good option.
So a couple of these are more advanced questions, but I think we can answer them okay. So the first one is, if you have a wide proximal box buccal lingually, the sectional isn't stable enough, and then a Tafelmeyer won't provide the appropriate contours. So what can you do?
Yeah. Let's see. I can't see my camera here. Is this back up on the screen? Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, there is a point of width where no sectional system will really be able to help you. We're right on the edge of that here. You can see that the end of the ring is still over tooth structure here. That helps to support the ring from collapsing the band into the box. If it were wider than that, one option, let me take the ring off of there. I've had a lot of folks, and this is probably the least difficult option or least time consuming option, is it depends on the shape of the restoration as it comes around. If it's really wide, you can build this up a little bit in here. You don't have to bring it up all the way, but you have to build it up high enough where there's enough tooth there for the ring to grip on it, right? So without collapsing the band. And once you've got that built up a little bit, freehand, this is what I'm talking about right here. So if this was like actually fractured off, you would have to build it up to the point where there's enough tooth structure for the ring to, not collapse the band. That would be a way that you could avoid having to use a Toffelmeyer. Before we had really wide rings like this, there would be times where people would put a Toffelmeyer on, build up the restoration, and then recut just the contact area and use the sectional in there. But that's what I was saying. If we can avoid having to do 2 restorations for the price of 1, that certainly is a better way to go. So if you can freehand enough material in here to support the ring, but that's the key, is you got to have enough. And if I had a smaller ring, if I didn't have the wide ring, I'd have to build up more. It's like here, right? Look what happens here. It just, if I had a band in there, it'd be squashed right into the restoration. I'd have to build that out further to support the ring.
Can you use a sectional matrix ring when you're building up the margin? Sorry, that's a deep margin elevation technique.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was confused there for a minute. Deep margin elevation is generally the first part of that procedure is done with a special Toffelmeyer type band that is designed to really snug down the neck of the tooth and drive itself subgingivally, and then build up supragingival, and then the final restoration created. So it would be the use of a deep margin elevation band until your subgingival portion is resolved, and then to remove that, place a sectional band, wedge, and ring to restore it. Oftentimes that deep subgingival margin elevation is done in preparation of an indirect restoration, but it can be used for a direct restoration.
Will you receive materials for the hands-on course if you sign up?
Yeah. The $325 fee covers the 3 hours of CE. The materials that you see on the screen, the kit, the forceps, the Typinot, will be shipped to you. They are yours to keep. There's enough material in there that you can start treating patients the next day. There'll also be bonding agent and composite from 3M in that, that is yours to keep.
And that was it for questions, Kevin.
Well, great. Well, hey, still have 200 folks signed in. So thanks so much for sticking through all the questions. Really appreciate your attentiveness and your willingness to join us here this evening and ask questions and participate in the event. Really appreciate that. And as Kendall mentioned, we will send out an email with the course eval and quiz in a few moments. And tomorrow we'll send out another email that has a link to the recording. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time.